From inside the Banner offices along the Inner Harbor, it is the Banner Baseball Show. Paul Mancano and Jon Meoli live on a Tuesday in December to discuss the Orioles' off-season moves. They made an addition, John. Signed Tomo Yuki Sugano. We'll talk about what he means for the Orioles' rotation. We'll also talk about a potential reunion with an old friend. I don't know if we could call him a friend. Perhaps a frenemy, Jack Flaherty.
He was here.
He was certainly here. He was an Oriole. And then we'll discuss some other rotation options for the O's. But, John, you were not there at winter meetings last week. Did you miss it? Did you miss being stuck inside a hotel with a bunch of baseball people for days on end?
No, and that's not to say that I didn't not sleep, because I did not sleep. We had a sick infant, so I didn't sleep, and I got probably the same amount of sleep as I would have gotten if I was in Dallas. But it seems like this was one that was okay to miss.
Yes, you really didn't miss. I mean, you missed Juan Soto signing the biggest contract ever, but it's not like he was there. There wasn't, and from an Orioles perspective, there have been other more interesting winter meetings. I mean, I think back to this I think was my fifth or sixth winter meetings that I've been to. Kyle Gibson being announced by Mike Elias on the first day of winter meetings, and also giving the terms of the contract, which no team ever does, or at least the Orioles never do, was pretty wild, as crazy as things get in Orioles land. But perhaps the most interesting was 2018, when Mike Elias was a fresh-faced GM, and the Orioles were still looking for a manager when they went to Las Vegas.
Yeah, so they didn't have a manager. I remember sitting in the hallway outside of his media suite, or his suite, where we were doing a media availability, and people started showing their phones to each other, and I was doing something. I was texting an editor. I was doing something. I was not paying attention. And then we went in, and there started to be this have you? It was very indirect. They were asking have you hired a manager? Have you offered anyone a job to be the manager? Like 5 indirect questions, and I didn't really understand what was going on. What had happened shortly before we walked in was that someone, I don't know who, had tweeted that Brandon Hyde was selected to be the manager, and there was no, it was not.
I think it was on the TV screen.
Well, that's what happened. So I had no idea, as they're asking all these as they're playing footsie about these questions, I had no idea what was going on. I was like, what is this? And then I was sitting, there's there's chairs, there was a couch. I was sitting next to your old colleague, Sarah Perlman, and there was a TV on the wall opposite us. And eventually she started nudging me. I was sitting right there. It's report.
Literally playing footsie.
Yeah, actually. Yeah. And she was report, Orioles hired Brandon Hyde. And at that point, Mike started getting texts on his watch, and I could see him listening to questions and answering it. And she was we were doing she was you want me to do this? I was no, I'm going to do it. I was first year, as the lead beat reporter at the Baltimore Sun, I was going to be the big boy. And I'm ask the big boy question. And I was just Mike, this is really I'm sorry to do this, but we're sitting in this room, and on that television screen, it says that Brandon Hyde was hired as man. Did you is Brandon Hyde going to? And he was I just don't know what to tell you.
Real baptism by fire for Elias.
Yeah. Messages at that point are always check your phone before you go into a media session with a baseball executive. Always turn the TV off when you're going to be doing a briefing in those situations if you're the team. And, always, ask the questions you want to ask directly to.
You asked a direct question, and he didn't have a direct answer.
Yeah. That was a fun meeting though, because then it was a whole couple days of Brandon Hyde's the manager, but they weren't saying it.
Right.
So I remember doing a bunch of stuff with that. There was also a tech expo next door to the media room.
Classic Vegas.
Yeah. Both baseball tech.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
So Trackman was there and Rapsodo, and I was standing in the hallway doing something, and I saw Scott Coolbaugh, the old Orioles hitting coach, walk by. And he was going in there, and he just signed me in with him, and I went in and I talked to all these people with these companies, because at that point the Orioles were basically going from playing with sticks and rocks to they were gonna have computers and all this cool stuff, and did a really cool story about what all the cool stuff was. And then I read a couple days later there was some story from someone who was I was the only reporter in this tech expo. Here's what it was. And I'm thinking to myself, I guess I wasn't supposed to be there. It turned out it wasn't, but it was a good story nonetheless.
Yeah, you sneaked your way in there. That was when, the Orioles were just remaking everything. That winter meetings was literally just about the Orioles hiring people. They were pretty upfront with, we're not signing anybody. for signing anybody's going to be to a minor league deal. We're going to winter meetings and we're just interviewing a bunch of people.
Yeah.
Things have changed.
Yeah, it was a lot different. Yeah, now like they've gone the complete opposite way. Now they get their business done before winter meetings, and like
literally the night before they signed 2 guys, Gary Sanchez, Tyler O'Neill.
Yeah.
And then they go to winter meetings and then do nothing. But then they did their business, a little bit more business when they got back from winter meetings. Let's talk about Tomo Yuki Sugano, 35-year-old pitcher who has pitched for the Yomiuri Giants in the Japanese Baseball League for 12 seasons. He has racked up a pretty incredible career, over 1,800 innings, a 2.45 ERA. He's won the MVP over there twice, and is coming off a season in which he had a 1.67 ERA, 156 innings pitched. This is a 1-year, $13 million deal for a 35-year-old. So you're talking about, aside from the contract option that was at the end of Craig Kimbrell's contract, you're talking about the exact same age and contract that the Orioles handed to Craig Kimbrell last year. But this is a totally different gamble. This is a guy who has never pitched in Major League Baseball before. He is going to come over here as a 35-year-old rookie, potential Rookie of the Year candidate. This is a fascinating way for the Orioles to try to address a pitching need, and one that I didn't see coming at all.
Yeah, I mean, there's no, basically, like, if you like have a MLB credential, like you work for MLB, you know who this guy is, and like, you're like a real baseball person, you would. It's very fascinating to me. I saw, Saris at The Athletic, who's, one of the best to do what he does. He used some like late career coming from Japan to the U.S. comps of like Hisashi Iwakuma and like Hiroki Kuroda from earlier in this century, I suppose, as like guys who weren't like, Roki Sasaki, who weren't Shohei Ohtani, who weren't Yamamoto, not like in their prime guys, but like still like knew how to pitch and came over and pitched really well. Those are 2 guys who pitched well and like pitched well, well into their 30s.
Yeah.
It's a gamble because it's $13 million, but like it seems like that's kind of the short-term gambles are the ones the Orioles are willing to take. Like that's something that, when you have money, you can eat. And I know there's a computer program somewhere in the warehouse that could tell you like, yes, even if the ball's different, like his stuff will play because X, Y, and Z. But this is a guy who throws the ball in the zone a ton.
Yep.
Not premium velocity, but 5-6 pitch mix, depending on where you're looking. And if he's one of those guys who can, move the ball around the zone and mix pitches and mix locations and not get squared up, then like $13 million is going to prove to be a bargain. But I'm not sure what the middle ground looks like. I'm not sure he's going to muddle to like a 4.5 ERA in 27 starts.
Right.
Like it's either going to be like, this is like, oh my God, I can't believe we got this guy for 1 year and $13 million, or like, oh my God, I can't believe we're paying this guy $13 million. I don't think there's going to be an in between, but I'm not sure that I'm not sure the Orioles are really banking on that in between, honestly.
Right. And to further the Craig Kimbrell comparison, because these are wildly different players, but I didn't necessarily love the idea of paying Craig Kimbrell $13 million for 1 year, only because the downside of that is he struggles, and then you can't pitch him in the 8th or 7th inning because he's only been a 9th inning guy. He's only been a closer in his career. And we saw that happen. We saw him struggle in the second half. Orioles took him out of the closer role and he struggled even more.
Yeah.
And then they end up being in a situation where they're a week away from the playoffs. They release him and they are going with Sir Anthony Dominguez, somebody they picked up at the trade deadline as their closer. So that was the downside of that. For this, if Sugano is inserted into the rotation, let's say he makes the rotation, we'll talk about where he fits in that rotation, out of camp, and he struggles down the stretch, the Orioles can always take him out of that rotation, try him as a reliever. If that doesn't work, they part ways. That's the absolute worst case scenario. But there really isn't, until you get to that point. You can use him as a starter. You could potentially maybe use him as a long reliever. And you're talking about a rotation that could get 2 major upgrades by midseason in Kyle Bradish and Tyler Wells. So it's really just, let's get through these first couple months. This is a guy who has thrown a lot of innings. He has impeccable control, total opposite of Shintaro Fujinami, who the Orioles had, who was outstanding electric stuff, but could not find the strike zone to save his life. This is a guy who last year at age 35 walked less than a batter per 9 innings. He's got impeccable control. He's not going to strike out a lot of guys, like you said, 6.4 Ks per 9 at this point in his career. His four-seam fastball is down to 92, where it was 96 early in his career. And those 5-6 pitches, you're talking about a four-seamer, a two-seamer, a splitter, a cutter, a curveball, a slider. He is a crafty righty at this point in his career, but a fascinating pitcher profile to add to this group.
Yeah, and you know, I wrote a little bit about this in the newsletter that's going to come out today. Something I
on
wanted
the BaltimoreBanner.com.
On the BaltimoreBanner.com. I think you say that you can subscribe
$1 for 6 months.
Yeah, I just don't know if that's still true.
Yeah, it is.
I don't want to make any false promises, but definitely do that. It feels similar to the Craig Kimbrell signing as well, in that like they don't need, you know, Josh Hader was on the market and you could have gone out and signed like the best closer available for 4 years and $60-something million.
Right.
Which I think I undersold that, but you could have gone and signed that because you needed a closer, but like they didn't need that. Excuse me. They just needed a 1-year closer for Felix Bautista. Do the Orioles need a front of the rotation starter? Like, yeah, right now, sitting here right now, they do, but you can also see a world where like they have those guys in Grayson Rodriguez and Kyle Bradish already ready to be those top of the rotation starters. You can see where they have, you know, you're still kind of in wait and see mode with Kid Povich, even though he's really good down the stretch. And I think that there's probably a lot more upside to realize. You're still in wait and see mode. They need that like 1-year thing. If this works out, like fantastic, then we're talking about like another pitcher who's probably overqualified for whatever his rotation role is going to be.
Right.
Zach Eflin is going to be overqualified for anything, you know, in the middle of a rotation, but with Grayson Rodriguez and somebody probably ultimately above him, like Zach Eflin will be overqualified for that. Dean Kramer will be overqualified for the back end of the rotation. So will Albert Suarez based on what he did. And this is a pitcher in Sugano who will be, you know, probably not pitching in the first series of the year.
Right.
And like, will be able to ease his way into this because the Orioles are going to end up having other options and there's not going to be a lot of pressure. And I think you can see a world where this goes well and doesn't, you know, have a real impact on what they're going to do the rest of the offseason.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It doesn't necessarily rule out them signing anybody else. And we'll talk about or trading for another ace type pitcher, which they still need. I think you could, you know, you talked about on the last show, having an ace at the top in Corbin Burns last year allowed everybody to be bumped back a day. And it just made life so much easier.
Yeah.
But you look at, I mean, the value of somebody like Albert Suarez last year, who was 35 as well. He was 34 last year and pitched 133 innings last year. How valuable were those 133 innings? They used him in a starter role. They used him in a relief role. And he just absolutely saved a rotation that was going through a calamity of injuries. When you're talking about this rotation, though, right now, and let's just go with what we have before we get into some other options that they could add. I mean, I think the guaranteed locks right now are Zach Eflin, Grayson Rodriguez, Dean Kramer is close to a lock. And then you're talking about Albert Suarez, Cade Povich, Chase McDermott, Trevor Rogers, and now Sugano that are going to be fighting for spots in the rotation. If you had to pick it right now, go into camp, you're Brandon Hyde, who is going to be your starting rotation and what order would you slot them in at?
I would say, I think it would mean a lot to Grayson Rodriguez to start opening day. As you know, things stand right now, if they sign somebody who is, you know, if Corbin Burns comes back, if somebody else comes back, like of that caliber comes in, I think that like if all things being equal, like Zach Eflin probably would be cool with like letting Grayson Rodriguez have that and do that, and it'd probably be good for everyone. So let's go Rodriguez, Eflin, Kramer, Sugano, Povich.
Gotcha.
And Albert Suarez will start a game within the first 3 weeks of the season, and it will not be planned, and it'll go well, and everyone will be glad to have him.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think it's going to be a fascinating battle. I think they're going to add still to this rotation mix. We'll talk about some of the other options that are out there. One guy who is out there is Jack Flaherty, and the Orioles have watched as, you know, guaranteed number 1, number 2 guys have dropped off the board. Max Fried signs with the Yankees. Nathan Eovaldi, who is maybe a number 2, number 3 in some rotation, went back to the Rangers. There aren't a whole lot of other options out there to be aces on free agent markets unless you're bringing back Corbin Burns. Jack Flaherty kind of represents the top end of the middle pack of he is, as Ken Rosenthal reported, a fallback option for the Orioles. And John, I think a lot of people saw that. A lot of Orioles fans saw that. And they were like the friends who saw, their friend talk about the girl that they dumped and thought, should I get back together with them? And they thought, stay away.
Yeah.
Don't make the same mistake that you did before. But it seems like potentially the Orioles may be talking themselves back in. The first stint in Baltimore did not go great, but the Orioles seem at least interested in giving it another try.
Yeah, I mean, the guy who pitched in Detroit and Los Angeles last year is worth having on your team.
Yes. The guy who pitched in St. Louis for the first half of his career is worth having it.
Yeah, and I was looking at this. I wrote about, he was the free agent of the week in Inside the Dugout, the newsletter, and I was looking at, in those articles, and it's mentioned frequently, Athletic, that the Orioles kind of acknowledged that Jack Flaherty wore down. He had a couple of seasons where he wasn't healthy leading up to that year where the Orioles acquired him. So he was well past where he'd been the previous few years in terms of innings and workload, and having built that up last year in 2023. In 2024, it was better. It was closer to what he's been when he's been healthy and he's been on. So like, there's definitely a world where you could tell yourself, like, this guy is like, now that whatever happened is behind him, there were some things that happened in his career which are not good, which is like coming out of the bullpen for the Orioles in the playoffs and like not getting to be in the rotation and not getting the contract you want in free agency. Like all those things like have an impact. Like it's just a matter of like how much they trust. Like, is he going to be the same guy who was on a prove it contract once he's already proven it and gotten paid? Is he going to be the same guy who came in and didn't have the best time? Like, it's really challenging. And like that would be banking a lot of money on like very like human, like not quantifiable things that you can't really predict. And that feels like something that is hard for me to envision the Orioles doing. And that's not to say they won't do it, but it's not very knowable.
Yeah, no. And we don't entirely know what went wrong the first time in Baltimore. We may never know. But a quick history lesson for those who don't remember. I mean, he pitches in St. Louis, has incredible highs early in his career, suffers a series of injuries, and then over the course of 3 seasons before 2023 is really hampered by those injuries, pitches a combined 154 innings. He starts out the 2023 season with St. Louis, pitches 109 innings. Orioles deal 3 players for him. They deal Cesar Prieto, Drew Rom, and Zach Showalter, and it did not work out. Down the stretch, he had a 6.75 ERA. He had one disastrous outing, and he said he didn't bounce back and wouldn't really expound upon that. It didn't seem like he was having a great time on the Orioles. He was taken out of the rotation, pitched that 1 inning in the playoffs out of the bullpen, and then signs a 1-year contract with Detroit to try to get his value back up because he's still under 30, still has pretty good stuff. And it works out great. He has a 3.17 ERA. He gets traded midseason, wins the World Series with the Dodgers, looks like the guy that he was at his peak in St. Louis, racks up 162 innings, and built back up his value sufficiently to the point where now the Orioles are interested again. But we just don't know what went wrong the first time. And the Orioles did say, like you said, that he was worn down, which interestingly enough, when I asked Mike Elias at the winter meetings what he thought might have gone wrong with Trevor Rogers, he said basically the same thing. The Orioles traded for Trevor Rogers at this deadline. They trade Kyle Stowers and who else?
Connor Norby.
Connor Norby. Yeah, that's right. To the Miami Marlins in order to get Trevor Rogers. And he did not work out down the stretch. And Elias said he thought he was worn down as well. But we don't really know if that's the reason that he struggled. We don't know if he really enjoyed his time in Baltimore. We don't know if the Orioles enjoyed having him. It didn't work out statistically. It didn't work out how they wanted it to. But if you were interested in him then, in theory, you would be interested in him now. The only thing is you now have more evidence of him being in the building and it not working out.
Yeah. And we're also talking about different pitching coaches than were here at the time. Not necessarily.
Chris Holt is not here anymore.
Not necessarily a different rotation. It's a lot of the same faces, but it's all just that type of thing where like, and the Orioles don't really seem to, they value like the veterans with the makeup that they know. I feel like they've overpaid at times for, for those presences that they can, know they can rely on and are going to be those clubhouse guys. It just doesn't seem like
Kyle Gibson.
Yeah, Kyle Gibson, the James McCanns, the Jordan Lyles, like all those grownups that they brought in to do that. It's just we're operating on the premise that like they are going to give a free agent pitcher market value and like be the top bidder on a free agent pitcher, which is to this point not something that we've seen them do.
Yeah. I mean, Jack Flaherty would probably take a multi-year deal at this point. He signed his 1-year contract, his pillow contract, to get his value back up. He's not looking to do that again. And the Orioles have yet to sign a pitcher to a multi-year contract.
Yeah. I mean, God, what would the floor be? The floor would be like what Eovaldi signed for, and he'd probably try to go for longer than that because he's a lot younger than Nathan Eovaldi. It's really challenging to see a world where, all the things we're talking about are valid factors, but like every time a pitcher goes off the board, the prices of the pitchers who are still on it go up.
Yeah.
And like that's the part that seems like, as I'm thinking about it, more of an obstacle than his time here the first time around.
Right. Eovaldi signed for 3 years, $75 million, and Eovaldi's 35, I believe.
This is like the third time this has happened. 35 could be considered by some the prime of people's lives.
Yes.
I'm not pitching in the big leagues.
Yeah.
But I feel like I'm not that old.
Yeah. It's just tough because you look at you're not.
35 is old though.
You're not washed.
Okay.
Trust me. I mean, there are guys out there that we're going to talk about that are on the free agent market that are probably washed, and they're 40.
And they might be younger than me too.
And some of them might be younger. But I mean, if you were to, take away Jack Flaherty's name and just give me his stats and just give me his stuff and just give me his age, you'd say that's somebody the Orioles should pay. It's just they tried it already and it didn't work. And it's the couple that got married, got divorced, and now they want to get remarried again. And everyone's just biting their teeth at the second ceremony.
Yeah. The other notable reunions in this Orioles front office history include Michael Givens, and I'm pretty sure that's the only time they've run back. Jorge Lopez, yeah.
Neither of those worked.
Didn't work out great either time. So
yeah, we'll see. Yeah. But there are some other guys. If you're still looking for guys that aren't named Jack Flaherty that the Orioles could still sign in free agency, not as many top end of the rotation guys. Corbin Burnes is still out there. The Orioles, from everything we've heard, have not been ruled out per se, but they're not the first teams that are mentioned. They're not one of the first teams mentioned when discussing Corbin Burnes' market. His agent, Scott Boras, spoke with Orioles media the other day and kind of danced around it and said, this ownership is committed to extending the guys that they've drafted, which is a good sign, and also supplementing the core. But he didn't really say Corbin Burnes he didn't specifically say the Orioles are engaged on Burnes or anything like that.
Yeah, but there's also like a long history of like when we get to the top Scott Boras free agents of like the owners being the ones who get the contract to the level that he wants it to get to.
Yes.
So that felt to me like him saying like, we know Mike Elias's best offer, like based on Mike Elias's best offer, Corbin Burnes will pitch somewhere else.
Yes.
But like, if you really want him back, David Rubenstein and company,
call me
like
directly.
You have my number and like, we can do that. And like, that's how it felt to me. And if that's going to happen, like,
right.
Great. If but like that's certainly how that felt to me. And like,
yeah, I mean, that's exactly how he got the Bryce Harper contract done. That's how he got the Juan Soto contract done.
Chris Davis.
You bypass the GM. The GM says, I've done the best I can do. And Scott Boras says, I think your owner can do a little bit better.
Yeah. I heard a funny story back in that era of that, like somebody who worked for Scott Boras, who was like responsible for like being like the talent, like, kind of identifying talents. It was like having an early conversation with Dan Duquette. Scott Boras was, and like Dan was like, yeah, we don't really need like Chris Davis. We have this guy Trey Mancini who's going to do this and that and the other thing. And Boras hangs up with him and calls this guy. He's like, who the heck is Trey Mancini that's going to take Chris Davis's spot? Like, why don't I know about this guy? And turned out, that would have been what happened.
Yeah,
if Chris Davis and Trey Mancini will turn out to be a fine big. But he was like, the way that Dan was talking about him, it was like, what? Like, who's this guy?
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, it's amazing that Boras is able to, I mean, he and the agents below him just are able to get as many guys as they do. I mean, Tyler O'Neill is a Scott Boras guy.
Yeah.
But then they also get guys to convert to him, to the Church of Boras at, a young age. I mean,
Gunnar
Henderson.
Gunnar Henderson had different representation. And there are people in the Orioles organization who credit like Gunnar like made a huge leap when he did, but like he credited like people credited to me like the fact that he was with Scott Boras and like got to go from being like, a guy with potential to like, okay, like train with some big leaguers, like see what this looks like. Like you want to do this, like you can be this guy. And like, to his credit, he was already on that path and kind of took it to another level.
As frustrating as Scott Boras can be as a figure to fans, players love him.
Yeah.
I mean, he had a disastrous. He had a bad offseason last year with, Jordan Montgomery and Blake Snell and some of the contracts. Did he have Blake Snell?
Blake Snell, Montgomery.
Some of the guys he had.
A couple others.
Yeah, not getting the contracts that they wanted and it not working out. But he still has an excellent track record, obviously. All right. Other than that, though, you've got Sean Manaea out there who figures to be a number 2, number 3 starter. He's a lefty. He was offered a qualifying offer. The Orioles, there was a report that they were worried about signing players who were offered a qualifying offer because of the draft pick compensation that's attached. Mike Elias publicly shot that down when we spoke with him at the winter meetings. The Orioles would get back, if they lose both Corbin Burns and Anthony Santander, they'd get back draft pick compensation because they offered both those guys qualifying offers. I don't think it should be a big factor, but also I pointed out on the last show that the Orioles have shown that they are willing to part with draft compensation when the player that they are acquiring is that good. When they traded for Corbin Burns, they traded a competitive balance round pick. So I don't think that a player receiving a qualifying offer would stop them. I think it's just another piece of the puzzle that they have to factor in. It's like you're trading a draft pick in essence and signing the guy for a contract.
Yeah, a very long and expensive contract, which is again something we have not seen them do.
Yes.
I feel like if Colton Cowser had won the Rookie of the Year, then they would not be as skittish on doing this because then you'd have like 3 picks in the 30s and like it's good to have 3, but like 2 is not bad either. I'm fascinated to see if they end up actually pulling the trigger on one of these qualifying offer guys.
So Manaea got it. He's 33. He had a 3.47 ERA last year. Would be an enticing add to that rotation. And then you've got a bunch of kind of bulk guys after, Roki Sasaki, who, interestingly enough, Orioles just signed another Japanese pitcher. It's a different equation when you're talking about Roki Sasaki because he is coming over as an international free agent, which means you can only sign him with money out of their free agent pool, which means no team can go out there and make a, $200 million offer for a 23-year-old starter. But it is interesting that the Orioles dipped their toe in the waters there by signing Sugano. And Mike Elias, when he was meeting with us in the suite, was asked about what kind of pitch he would make to free agent X who's coming over from, Japan. And he listed, look, we have a great history developing pitchers. We have a ballpark that should suit you. We have an exciting young core that can win. And that would be his pitch to a free agent. I guess that was his pitch to Sugano to get him to come over. Yeah. But also that could be his pitch for Roki Sasaki. And you talked about on your newsletter, Roki Sasaki, in theory, should be interested in signing with a team like the Orioles. Biggest hurdle is they're not on the West Coast. They're not the Dodgers. They don't have Shohei Ohtani. They're not closer to his home country.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, that is the top of the list of like, in terms of like lifestyle convenience, like Baltimore is not a place that
which is
close to
understandable.
Japan. I don't know how many hours it is. Yeah.
It doesn't have the same culture that, LA does.
Yeah. It just feels to me like it would be such a validation of what the Orioles are trying to build on the pitching side to have someone choose them for these reasons. And that's not to say that like it needs it. It's going to it's going to happen regardless. Like there's going to be fruits of what they're doing. There's going to be progress and there's going to be demonstrations of like the fact that they're really good at working with pitchers. There are a lot of signs that that's happening anyways, whether it's going to be, the prospect lists that keep coming out the rest of this year. It's going to be, the fact that like the pitching staff was basically in shambles this year and they had like the same stats like across the board as they did the year before when they were really good. And everyone was like, whoa, Orioles pitching. It just feels like it would be a real significant thing for the Orioles to get this, to get that kind of validation based on merit. That's not something anyone would say before. As I was doing my prospect calls for the Baseball America list, that was what kept coming up. People were just like, it just happened, like everyone after a couple seasons of this front office, like, oh yeah, like whatever they're doing with hitters, like it's working. And like, I don't think anybody was saying that this time last year about pitchers. I think it was starting to show like green shoots, for lack of a better term. But like now we're talking about like it just happened. So
yeah,
that's the type of thing that Hiroki Sasaki would want.
Right. All right. Other than those top end guys like Minaya and Sasaki, you've got Andrew Heaney, Michael Lorenzen, Nick Pivetta, Jose Quintana. Those guys slot in as middle rotation guys. Little bit older. You know, Heaney's 34, Lorenzen's 33, Pivetta's 32, and had the qualifying offer. Jose Quintana's 36. So adding one of these guys doesn't necessarily, you know, give you that ace that you would be missing if Corbin Burnes walks. But they could give you a little bit of help because that's guaranteed, you know, if they stay healthy, that's guaranteed bulk. And they might cost a whole lot less because they are on the wrong side of 30 than, you know, an ace like pitcher like Corbin Burnes, who is also 30, but, you know, is an ace.
Yeah. It's fat. It's almost at the point now too, where we're talking about these like bulk guys. You know, I was looking at like Michael Wacha signed like a 2-year, like $32 million deal last year and ended up getting like a bunch of Cy Young votes. So like you can get real quality in this part of the market. I think that's been demonstrated in the past. The problem is you don't know which pitcher is going to be the one to do that. And where the Orioles are now, you know, how many number 3 starters? I mean, if you have 5 number 3 starters, you have an average rotation. Like that's kind of how that works. If you have 5 number 5 starters, which we've seen before, like you have a bad rotation. If you have a number 1 and 2 number 2s and 5 number 3s, you have a really good rotation. Like, so like that's kind of where we're at right now. Like if you wanted to slap numbers on everybody who's going to be in the Orioles, like opening day rotation, like you could probably give Zach Eflin and Grayson Rodriguez 2s and everyone else 3s. And like that's, or you know, Dean Kramer 3-ish, 3-ish, 4-ish, like whatever the average is going to be, it's going to be closer to 3. Like if you add a 1, it's going to be a lower average. And like,
and you talk about
average.
Bradish is potentially a 1, but I don't know if you can count on him being a 1 this year. And same with Grayson Rodriguez. Yeah.
So you're talking about like, as you're getting into this mix, and like, this is not about like, you know, satisfying the clamor for a pitcher, but you're going to end up with a lot of like sameness and like not in a bad way. Like there's a lot of teams that, you know, if they lose a starter and they could call on somebody who's like good as like their 5th, 6th, 7th option, like a lot of teams want that. That's what the Orioles are positioning themselves for. And any of these guys who we're talking about who are going to get those like 2, 3, you know, $40, $50 million deals, like probably some of these will go higher, but like any of those guys you're talking about are going to reinforce the floor of this team. And they made a lot of trades in July to reinforce the floor of their pitching staff. Like they feel like that's very important. Mike Elias has, you know, raked himself over the coals for it and like basically said he didn't need to, and he made mistakes in doing that. But like they value like having as many like real big league pitchers as possible. And these guys fall into that category.
And these are a lot of guys that before they had signed Sugano, I was really looking at. And I think Sugano might kind of provide more of that. That doesn't mean they couldn't use more. But if Sugano is who they hope he is, he's going to give them innings and he's going to give them, you know, starts every 5th or 6th day. And he's going to give them an ERA just under 4.
Yeah. The Sugano feels independent. Like, it feels like something they would have done anyways. Like if they had signed Corbin Burnes last week at the winter meetings and like had a big press conference, did a big splash, like it still feels like this is something they would have done if they felt like it was like the right thing to do. So I kind of view those as independent, and I'd also don't know that. I think that now that it's done, it makes the appeal for some of these guys and the need for reinforcing the middle and like thatching up the floor. It makes it a little less, but that's not to say they're not going to do that. Right.
And also if you're talking about, and we'll talk about trade options in a little bit, but let's say the Orioles decide we're not going to be able to get our ace this winter. We'll save it we'll either hope Grayson Rodriguez turns into an ace, or we'll hope Kyle Bradish does, or we'll try to get that guy at the deadline.
Yeah.
Maybe the team that you are trading with to acquire an ace is going to ask for pitchers back. And maybe they're asking for Cade Povich or Chase McDermott. And look, we saw the Orioles have to trade one of their pitching prospects to get a reliever last year. They had to trade Seth Johnson they've had to do that in the past. So adding these veterans makes it so that if you lose Cade Povich, Chase McDermott in a trade, it's not the end of the world because you have a little bit of extra depth. I in terms of this market, I mean, I really liked before they signed Sugano, Jose Quintana. I know he's 36. He's a soft tossing lefty.
36 is old.
That is old, but he's always been good. I mean, every year everybody's waiting for Jose Quintana to fall off, and he doesn't. Yeah. He had a 3.75 ERA last year. Like, he would have given you, if he stayed healthy, he would have given you good innings. And he may not start a playoff game, but he just would have been a nice change of pace lefty that, could have fit right into your rotation and given you a lot of good innings.
Yeah.
But beyond that, I mean, then you're talking about this other market of high upside, but very high risk group of guys. And you're talking about a lot of washed Cy Young winners, potentially washed, like Max Scherzer, like Justin Verlander.
Not young.
Verlander's 42. Scherzer's 40. Charlie Morton, I think, is another interesting guy. He had a 4.10 ERA last year, or 4.19 ERA, I should say. He's 41 years old. You could bring back John Means on a 2-year deal. I think any team that's signing him, we saw the Red Sox connected to him, would have to sign him to a 2-year deal because he's going to be rehabbing for most of the first year.
Yeah.
And then Walker Buehler, I think, is a fascinating high upside guy because he's still just 30. He has missed a lot of time in his career with Tommy John surgery. 4 years ago, he was 4th in Cy Young voting, and he also had a hip injury this year. Last year, though, he came back and was awful. 5.38 ERA, just 16 starts, whip of 1.5. But if you can get old Walker Buehler back, it's a huge risk. But maybe he's willing to sign a 1-year deal that's close to $20 million. You put him in the pitching lab and you say, let's see if we can figure this guy out. That's a guy who in the past has been a number 1, has been a number 2.
Yeah.
It's just whether you get that guy back is anyone's guess.
Yeah. I'm not sure if we talked about it in this venue or I've talked about it just in my life or written about it. I don't know. It's like,
it's hard to tell.
It's hard to tell. We're just adding all these platforms and gosh, I don't know. But I've been really fascinated to see, we definitely talked about it and how the Orioles are willing to pay for what they're going to get. And if they think that $10 million is what 175 innings of Kyle Gibson's worth, they're happy to pay that because they know they're going to get it.
Right.
I think one of the things that, I've been told and have changed a little this offseason is that the calculus has changed. They might be willing to pay, a little more because they know that the 70, 80, 110, 120 innings they get from a pitcher are really good. And they're just willing to do that. They might be willing to take on that kind of risk in a way that they weren't in the past. And that's not to say that you're going to sign anyone who's got huge red flags to a multi-year deal. But I think that under that logic where the net is wider, just because you might only get 100 innings from one of these pitchers who are on the tail end of their career and just aren't as sturdy and durable as they have been in the past. If those 100 innings are close to the quality that you'd expect from the name on the back of the jersey, I think that's a price the Orioles would be willing to pay and a risk they'd be willing to take. Is that going to satisfy the clamor for,
an ace, a guaranteed ace?
And a guaranteed ace? No, nothing is going to, outside of at this point, Corbin Burns, maybe Roki Sasaki. But if you have the depth and the quality to backfill for those 5-6 weeks where you're not going to have, let's just use the name Justin Verlander.
Sure.
If he's not in there for a month, but you can say, okay, we're still going to have Grayson Rodriguez and Eflin and all these other guys in there. You feel okay with that. And if you're not worried about the fact that you're paying this pitcher, whoever it is, X amount of money to be on the IL for a third of the season, then right. You're good with having them on the mound for the other 2/3 of the season.
Yeah. And then the hope is just you are a good enough team to make the playoffs and he's healthy when you're in a playoff game.
Yeah.
And those are, Verlander, Scherzer, those are veterans who have been there. They've been through the wars. They've won World Series. Those are guys who can come in and, in theory, if they're motivated, if they're interested in being there, if they're signing contract, they should be.
Yeah.
They can try to raise the floor or they can try to raise at least the ceiling of your pitching staff. It just feels like we're barreling towards, as more and more names come off the board, it just feels like we're barreling towards another trade. It feels like the Orioles are still going to have to give up prospects to get an ace, which is frustrating because money, if you pay a free agent, all you're doing is giving him money, which doesn't come out of anyone's pocket but the owner. And if you are trading for an ace, you are paying him money and you are also trading away prospects, which means that you are potentially dealing from the future to get to, to supplement the present. And, the Orioles do that Corbin Burnes deal 100 times out of 100. They got one excellent, outstanding year from Corbin Burnes. They are also going to have to watch as Joey Ortiz plays 5 years for the Milwaukee Brewers and wins a Gold Glove.
Yeah.
That is frustrating because so long as the Orioles show that they are not willing to re-sign the guys that they trade for, they are always going to be making 1 year, 2 year gambles. And Dylan Cease is somebody who fits into that mold because he is only one more year of team control. He is an ace. Last year with the San Diego Padres, hit a 3.47 ERA, over 10 strikeouts per 9. He's just 29 years old, same age the Orioles that Corbin Burnes was when the Orioles traded for him. But again, you're talking about a guy that you're trading premium assets for and is probably going to walk in a year again. And maybe it works out again. Maybe you win the World Series this year and you get over the hump. But you're talking about the same exact proposition, and you can only make so many of these trades before they come back to bite you. We saw how Dan Duquette's era ended, and it was a series of short-term trades that eventually doomed them. And I just have this concern that if you keep relying on these short-term trades, I know they have had a prospect glut, and it's fine to deal from that. We're not in that. They are near the top half of the league, top 10 in farm system. They're not as loaded prospect-wise as they have been before. And they need to continually backfill. And at some point, you're going to make mistakes drafting. At some point, you're not going to sign the guys you want to sign in international free agency. You're not going to be able to backfill like that. So when you keep making moves like that, you do risk the future of this team not being as good as you would think.
Yeah, it's a tricky proposition overall because you're talking about something that this team needs. And I think they're cognizant of if we keep trading for pitchers, we're going to need to keep trading for pitchers. The Astros, there were times when they would have loved to have made a bunch of trades towards the tail end of when these guys were there. But the names that were coming up were Framber Valdez and all these pitchers who are now a part of the Astros rotation, who helped them win a World Series, who are a meaningful part of what they're doing now. And they didn't trade them. Even if it would have helped the Astros get over some proverbial hump at the time. That's something that these guys live with and understand. I shudder to think about what the Padres always get 5 super high ceiling players in every trade they make.
Yeah.
And they also send 5 super high ceiling players out in every trade. So they just cycle them all through. I'm trying to think in my head what a trade with the Padres would even look like. It would just be a lot of
Kobe Mayo.
International type guys. But yeah, I think there's only a handful of those top guys. And I think the Orioles are we've seen over a number of years that those aren't the kind of guys they're going to trade. And then you're talking about whether it's perception or reality, a large gulf between the top and the rest of the system. And I'm just really fascinated to see how that plays out. But at the same time, it's a risk that is worth taking when they take it, because you're only on the hook for 1 year of the contract.
Right.
If you believe you can develop players, you believe you can develop more players. And these are good pitchers who are available. And that's a way to make this year's team better without putting yourself on the hook for money down the road, which even though there's new owners, that still seems like something they're not super interested in doing.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's just how many years can you keep doing it? Because the farm system is, if somebody goes down, as we saw at the second half of last year, the farm system's not always going to be there to save you.
Yeah.
Prospects are going to come up and not be as good immediately, like Kobe Mayo. And then there's once you get past Kobe Mayo and Samuel Basallo, there's a pretty large gulf between these guys. Could be great. Some of the guys behind them, like Judd Fabian or Juan Nunez, or some of these guys could come up Cade Povich and Chase McDermott they could come up and be awesome players, but you just don't have the guaranteed, like, the value of a Joey Ortiz is so big because no, he didn't necessarily have a spot to play on this team. Same with Connor Norby, but those are top 100 prospects that if anybody goes down, you feel so good about having that guy in the future. And that those guys are valuable players, and the Orioles are finding less and less of them every year because they're drafting later and later. So there is an expiration date when you continually trade from the future.
Yeah. And the trades are going to take a different, they're going to keep making trades. I think we saw at this deadline that they're not like locked in on not trading guys.
Right.
They're just going to take they're just going to look different, if they trade for Dylan Cease, it'll be a 4-player package, and 3 of them will be pitchers who didn't get to Bowie, but are like really impressive. I did the Baseball America list, like after the top 10, the next 7 guys are pitchers, like all of them in the low minors, except for 1, I think. And like, those aren't household names because for a variety of reasons, like when you take a pitcher on the 3rd day and nobody, you have to reach a certain level. Those aren't, but those are the guys people who go to the games and who are scouting and who are screening these things on a computer screen are going to say like, these are the dudes. And like, are those the types that you can say like, yes, we have Dylan Cease and we're trading him for Nestor Herman, for
Jackson Baumeister before he was traded.
But like, are those the types of guys who you can like say like, we're trading our dude for these guys?
Right.
Probably like on a baseball, like apples to oranges, like the scales are going to be equal, but it's not, trading for 2 top 100 prospects and a draft pick for Corbin Burns. You're doing something different at this point. You need somebody who's willing to do that.
Yeah. All right. I've kept you long enough, John. At Jon Meoli is his Twitter handle. I'm at Paul Mancano. I was going to throw in a quick pour one out because nobody knows these guys like you do. The prospects that the Orioles lost in the Rule 5 draft. Minor league and major league. I mean, Juan Nunez, who was mentioned.
Yes.
Gene Pinto, Dan Hammer, John Rhodes, Elio Prado, Zach Peak. Pour one out for all those guys. I was going to make you try to guess exactly where they came from, but I don't want to make you do that.
What do you mean, like where they came from?
Like how the Orioles acquired all those guys.
I mean, there's a lot of trades.
Elio Prado was the Andrew Kashner deal.
Yeah, the Cash Daddy. A couple of Angels trades in there. Yeah.
Zach Peak, I think, was the Garrett Stallings.
Zach Peak was with Dylan Bundy trade.
Dylan Bundy trade. Okay.
Pinto was with the
Garrett Stallings and the Jose Iglesias.
That was Iglesias. Nunez was Lopez. Prado's Kashner. Rhodes, Hammer. Dan Hammer from like the first draft. I actually asked somebody to like send me who they did protect in like the AAA phase because I saw all these guys getting picked.
Yeah.
Who did they protect? I was like, because it's like I think it's the same.
Who's left?
It's the same threshold of like you have to have been pro ball for like 3 or 4 years, basically. Like not, so the younger guys, and you have to like, somebody like Frederick Ben-Cosme, who's not in AAA yet, would get added to the AAA reserve list. And it was a lot of like the depthy, like older like guys, because they don't really have a lot of those that ended up being like on the AAA reserve list. And like, you do need that, I suppose. You do need that. Not I suppose. You do need that. But I was seeing these names come up. I was like, what? Like, I had texted somebody. I was like, can you send me who they protected? Like, I don't understand this at all. And seeing that, it made a little sense, but like very, it's also like the minor league Rule 5. But last year they lost Connor Gillespie, who signed a big league deal with the Braves. I saw he pitched in the big leagues last year at Cleveland, like signed a big league deal with the Braves. Like,
it's rare that you get a good player out of the AAA phase of the Rule 5 draft.
Yeah,
but it can happen.
Yeah, there's some injury risk in there. Juan Nunez seems like he could feels like back. He could come back, but like that's like a total like Padres.
Yeah, high A guy.
Yeah, like the stuff is nasty. Like, is he going to pitch? Like, is he going to stick in a big league bullpen? I'm not sure, but like, I think the Orioles would like to have him back.
Yeah,
if they could get him back.
And he was selected in the major league phase, so the Orioles, if the Padres don't want to keep him, they have to send him back, and the Orioles will just take him right back into their system. So he's got to stay on their Padres big league roster the entire season. So that's a big gamble to make for somebody who also had shoulder injuries, shoulder problems this past year.
Yeah, always way higher on like every list than I would find the courage to put him, which is not to say that he's not good, but like stuff is is really nasty.
Yeah. All right. Subscribe to the Baltimore Banner, $1 for 6 months. Also subscribe to the Banner Baseball Show. Thanks so much for tuning in live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. And we will be back in a week. We'll maybe have some more breaking news to discuss, but we will talk about some more offseason topics, more guys that could make sense for the Orioles.
We're doing it.
We're doing it. Thanks so much for tuning in. For Jon Meoli, I'm Paul Mancano. We'll catch you next time.